Hi. Um, we're still in a mess here. The the skirting boards have been put on now. Um, Courtesy of me. It's a dry day outside, and it's all right. I'm I'm not gonna do a talk this week on on the Bible, because to be honest with you, I haven't felt up to doing it. A good friend of mine died on Saturday, and possibly my best friend. Probably my best friend. So I was gonna chat to you a little bit about grief. And grief is a weird thing. Loads of people have different opinions of grief, and I can only speak from my own personal opinion. And grief takes lots of different forms, and for some people grieving may be crying a lot. For some people it's remembering. For some people it's crying when other people aren't around. Some people throw themselves into things. Hiya Dan, how's it going? For me, grief has always been a strange one, because when I'm in grief, I don't overly feel gushing emotions. And I know, like for my mum, she quite often feels gushing emotions. But for me, it's a matter of the first sort of time I remember grief was, or I remember somebody close to me dying. It was my friend Paul, who was a friend all the way through junior school, and in when we went up to the comprehensive school, we sort of lost touch a little bit, and Paul was having more and more time off school, and I had meant to go and see him. I had put it off, and I'll go and see him next week. I'll go and see him next week. And then I had a knock on my front door, and it was a friend, Nicholas. And we all knew Paul had leukemia, but it had never seemed to matter. And then my friend Nicholas knocked the front door. I answered the front door, and he just said straight out, "Paul's died." And that was a massive body blow for me. It was something that I'll never forget, because I had gone for months meaning to go up and see this boy that I'd been really close to for years, and I cried not so much for the loss of Paul, but I cried for the fact that I hadn't gone and talked to this person, and it was too late. Now, we were only about 11 at the time, and that was a hard lesson to learn at 11. So I've always tried to be honest with people, and I don't do it all the time. I do leave things go, but I try not to leave things go as go on without seeing a person. The next person that I remember dying was my cousin Conrad. It was probably when I was about 14 and he was 17, and he just learned to drive. And my cousin Conrad, I only saw him about 3 or 4 times because he lived up in Yorkshire, and I used to go up there and visit, and we one time his parents lived out in Spain, and he lived with his grandparents, and his parents' house was next door to his grandparents' house. So he took me one day into his parents' house, and his parents had 2 massive long swords across their hearth, and we took the long swords out the front garden, and we were fighting with with these long swords. I mean, they were almost as big as us. So we had quite a good relationship, even though my parents didn't think that we had. And because my mum didn't think that we had much of a relationship, when Conrad died, he died in a car accident at 17, and she just said, "Oh, your cousin Conrad's died. Now off to school." And I went to school, and I was quite numb, and I didn't go into classes. I just basically stood against the wall of the hall, and then I sat down on my own and cried quite silently. And that's sort of been the way for me to show my grief. I don't openly often show grief. I get choked up when I'm sometimes talking about people, but quite often grief to me is a personal thing, and I'll, like with Alan, my friend, who's died, I can talk about him and what have you, but then when I'm sitting on my own late at night, I'll start thinking about him and I'll cry. And that's okay, because grief comes to different people in different ways, and it none of it is wrong. The way that I grieve for people, it was like when my dad died, I basically took over. Hi Marcus. I basically did everything. I sorted everything out because my mum was not capable of sorting it out. My mum was in gushing grief. And it was a matter of she had to express everything, and she was expressing everything to the people who visited. But I wasn't overly bothered in terms of the people who visited. I just wanted to get things sorted for my dad. And I spoke at my dad's funeral, and I spoke twice. I spoke once in the church and once in the creme. And afterwards, there were a couple of people that came up to me and said, I couldn't have done that. I couldn't have spoken about my dad's life. And to me, it was important to speak about my dad's life. But then afterwards, when I was sitting down, I had a little cry. And I would urge people, it's not wimpy or anything to have a cry. And there's nothing wrong in showing grief in any form. Grief is something which is very personal, and it comes out in very different ways. And as I said, I much as lots of people have a thing about me being cool and calm and collected and what have you. As such, in that situation, I don't feel anything. And then it all wells up when I'm on my own, and I feel and I experience. But when I'm with other people, I'm a very practical person, and I know other people fall to pieces. I know other people who will be practical for a period of time and then fall to pieces. And like Andrea, when Andrea's sister died, Andrea still hasn't overly come to grasps with the fact that her sister's died. And some people will need counselling after death, and some people won't. But whichever way you deal with death, and I don't know whether you've dealt with lots of deaths or next to no deaths in your lifetime, but at some point you will have to deal with the death of a loved one. And whatever you feel, it's okay, because it's an expression of the feelings that you had for that person. And with Alan, I feel very blessed that he was in my life. I loved the guy, not in a physical, sexual way, but I loved the guy as a friend. And we spent many hours together. The past 18 months, we've spent hours and hours together because Alan had cancer as well. So I knew at some point he was going to die, but when that point comes, it's still a shock. And it's a good thing to feel blessed that somebody's been in your life. And I sort of think that that feeling of feeling blessed and feeling grateful that that person's life has touched yours is a far more important feeling than the feeling of loss. And sometimes you can feel the loss of a celebrity, but it's not quite the same as feeling the loss of a really good friend. And I just wanted to, hi Christine, I just wanted to sort of share some thoughts on that. I mean, when Jesus went to the tomb of Lazarus, he cried. And surely that says something about a man. A man can cry, and it's okay for a guy to cry. I said in one of my podcasts a couple of months back, we have a very different perception of manhood or manliness than the Jews or the Hebrews had. Now, if our Prime Minister was openly crying over people who'd been killed in war, we'd look at him a bit soft and say, wow, he's not hard enough to be the Prime Minister. We need another person. And yet, in Israel, if the Israeli Prime Minister didn't weep over the loss of a soldier, they would think, then he's too hard. So we have a completely different culture, and I'm of the opinion that it's okay for guys to cry. It's okay for girls to cry. It's okay for them not to cry as well, because emotions take us in different ways. Some people, when somebody's died, will just go into practical mode, and all they can think of is all the practicalities and everything that needs to be done. And I was sort of in that mode with my dad. But I tend to not show a massive amount of emotion, and that's my character. And each of us have a different character. We're not all the same. And I think that's the way that God made us. He made us to not all be the same. So to think of us dealing with things in exactly the same way, regardless of whether it's grief or whether it's any sort of emotion, is ludicrous. We're all different, and we all need to express things differently. The way that I tend to deal with grief is I'll keep it bottled in not on a purposeful basis, but it all seems to be bottled in within me until that time when I get to sit on my own, probably late at night, and maybe a song will come on the radio, or a song will be played. I know when my dad died, there was a song by Blackstone Cherry called Father. It had Father in the title. But whenever that came on, I would cry. And I still tear up. And it's been about 6 years. But I quite often, it's at that time when I'm relaxing and sort of leaving my guard down. It's sort of the time period when the guard is left down and I'm relaxing, that my emotions come out. And basically the whole point of this is to say that it's okay, whatever way you grieve. Some people will paint things, some people will write things down, some people will play things on an instrument. Caleb, for example, Caleb is my son, and he's got Asperger's, and he wouldn't come to the hospital to see my dad. And basically after the funeral, we didn't overly see Caleb, because Caleb had just gone up into his bedroom and gone to sleep. And straight after the funeral, Caleb couldn't stand in the lineup. He went back to the funeral car with Andrea's mum, and he just went to sleep. And he cried a little, but Caleb doesn't overly cry. And that was his way of dealing with it. Exactly the same as when Andrea's dad died. And Caleb had a really... it was really hard for Caleb, because both his granddads died within 6 weeks of each other. And his grand said to Andrea, where's Caleb in his granddad's funeral? And Caleb had just gone upstairs and gone to sleep. And that's Caleb's way of coping with things. And we all have different methods of coping with grief. Grief is an extreme emotion. And we're not all going to deal with things in exactly the same way. We're going to deal with things differently. And the main point of this video is to say it's fine. It's fine to deal with things differently. And we all have to understand that. I remember when my gran died, I had to sort out the flowers from the grandchildren. And I'm not the oldest grandchild, not by a long chalk. But it was me that had to pull everything together. And then after I pulled everything together, my parents had paid for it and what have you, a couple of my cousins didn't pay their share. And it was it was an oversight. But my dad had a go at me because he was out of pocket. And I was like, well, it wasn't my place in the first place. You basically enforced this on me. And my mum turned around to me and she said, you're really callous because you're not expressing grief in exactly the same way as I am. And I've taken something from that. I've taken from it that we don't all express grief in exactly the same way. And the way that I express grief may be totally different from the way that you express grief. But the way that each of us expresses grief is just as valid as the next person. And I think that that's important to grasp. Well, I have no idea how long I've talked for, but I just wanted to cover this off. And I'd like to finish off now just with a final word about my friend Alan. Alan was a great friend. He was a pastor of a church. He was a metalhead like me. And like Marcus and Martin and various other people. He was cantankerous and stubborn, and he was caring and loving in his own way. And he was dedicated to God. And I know that I'm going to see him again. I know where he's going or where he's gone. And some people don't know where they're going. And sometimes you don't know where somebody's gone, whether they've gone to heaven or hell. Please make sure of where you're going. And if there's a loved one, be it a family member or a friend, that you're not sure where they're going, ask them. And don't try and bamboozle them into becoming a Christian. But just put it out there. Put it out there that Christ died for us to be given the option of going to heaven. And it is an option. The other option is to go to the other place. But we do have a choice. And that choice is important. And we need to make that choice in this world. So broach the subject with people. But please, please, don't browbeat them. Just broach. Just have a conversation about it. And let them know that you are willing to talk about things. That there are other people who are willing to talk about it. And talking about God is good. But putting all the man-made all the man-made parts of God onto God is wrong. God is who he says he is in the Bible. And if you want to truly know who that is, read your Bible and find out who God is. God isn't the person that lots of preachers talk about. God is kind and loving and caring, but God is always also just and honest and faithful. Share about God with people who don't know him. But please, don't browbeat them. Don't Bible bash them. Because that just pushes people away from God. Be there to answer questions. And pose questions yourself. But don't push it onto anybody. Nobody ever took Christianity by somebody pushing them into it. I think that's enough from me. So just remembering Alan, remembering the way that he used to talk to people, and remembering that he talked to people in such an incredible manner that at one point a group of Muslims got together and they prayed. Thanks, Matt. And they prayed not to their God for him, but to our God for Alan. And that created a miracle in Alan's life. God bless you. Take care. Awesome to see you, Dan. We need to get together at some point and have a chat whenever we can in this weird time. God bless you. And if you've got anything that you want to talk about grief, I'm always here. Message me or any of the things that I talk about on my podcast. But today, have a great day. Know what it is to be alive. Know what it is to breathe another breath. And God bless you. And I love you. Goodbye.